Well, I'm very happy everybody's been able to join us today for padding boxes and trays. Oh my, a program that was put together with help from our board member Patty Wood Finkel and her colleague um, at the Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum and Gallery at Penn State University, Chelsea Trenbeath. Welcome, Chelsea. Thank you so much. Um, I'm going to try to monitor questions and anyone else coming into the program today. So I'm going to turn my camera off and mute. I see all of you have muted your microphones, and that should enable us to hear the program pretty well. If anyone has any questions and would like to put them in the chat or use the feature for raising your hand, I'll try to keep an eye on that too as we go. Thanks again, everybody, and we can go ahead and get started.
Alrighty. So hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm here at Penn State with the Earth and Mineral Science Gallery. I am working as a collections intern right now. I did just get a Master's of Science from the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm going to just jump right in. I had a little bit of a PowerPoint, but I'm afraid we might not have enough time to really go into that. So I'll try to cover what the concepts I was going to put into a PowerPoint into the lecture or webinar. And I can also send the PowerPoint out afterwards, just so you have something written a little bit better if there's anything you want to remember. And it also has some pictures and images. So the idea of having a archival storage box for a specimen, there's a couple different thoughts that you want to put into it. And first is you're going to want to use archival materials. So archival materials will be like Ethafoam. Ethafoam is a brand name, but the foam is a specifically designed styrofoam that doesn't off gas, and it has a bit of longer of a shelf life than other types of foams, so it won't break down quite like other foams. We've got blue board, which is a generic term for this archival acid-free cardboard. It's corrugated. It's really nice for making boxes and such out of it. Materials that we commonly use are a hot glue gun. The hot glue itself can be removable, and it doesn't, again, have properties such as off-gassing over time. Also things like Tyvek. Tyvek is a nice smooth material you can use to wrap things. It's nice and soft. It doesn't have burrs. It won't catch on something with a little bit of edge to it, and it won't rub things as much as other materials might. So you're going to want to think about having these sorts of archival materials on hand at times to be able to just augment your collection. Like, there's no perfect way of doing this, and it's going to be looking at what the ideals are and putting that with your costs of manpower, time, labor, and what the object, what the how important the specimen is. So if you look at something like this is an archival box. I've made it out of a blue board. I have these twill ties, which are also a neutral unbleached cotton. And this one in particular drops down so that you can get the object out. If I try to grab the object from the top, it would crush the object on the sides. The sides are very fragile. It has this very delicate reticulated structure. So by having the side drop down, I can pick up the object from the bottom. So that's one thing you need to think about also when making boxes is, how are you getting the object out of the box? How are you putting the object in the box? Are you going to accidentally drop it a little bit at the very bottom because you can't put your arms all the way down in it? And that will kind of give you a guide to the design that you want to do for your object. I also have some Ethafoam are some of this velara that has lined the edges. Also padding underneath in this corner, because this specimen is wobbly. So you don't want your specimen to move within your housing. If I take that out, the specimen will wobble when you move the box, and that gives that gives it more of a chance to break. So the idea of this is to have something that can house it, that will protect it, will keep it covered, and also pad it from the different vibrations, because even just walking by your cabinets will give you slight vibrations. Opening the drawers of cabinets will give you vibrations, and you want to stabilize the object, not have it move around, and give it a nice padding. So if there is a minute vibration, it can adjust to that and have that absorbed without putting tension and pressure on your specimen itself. So you can make an entire box like that. That is quite time intensive though. Another thing you can do is you can just sort of, you already have an archival tray and you have a specimen in your archival tray. Another method of being able to make this more ideal, because you can see it's wobbly, it's very tippy, it's not very steady, is to just add things to your tray to help it get the properties of stability and some padding at the bottom. That is one of my go-to things when I'm doing boxes, is putting just a sheet of Ethifoam at the bottom of each container, because it gives it that just a little bit extra padding, where if something knocks a little bit or drops a little bit or moves and shifts, it does have that cushioning material. These are really quick and easy. You can make little, I have these, I didn't bring these one, little templates that I made out of a file folder. I literally just cut a file folder and then fit them to the bottom of the box, and I just cut a bunch at a time, and I have a stack of all the foam pieces for the different size of boxes, and you can just slide them in as you're doing, as you're going through each specimen. On something like this, you're going to want a little bit more because this is a big specimen that is wobbly. So what I did is I took some chunk of Ethifoam, and since the Ethifoam does have a rough edge on the sides where you cut it, like the top and the bottom usually are pretty smooth, but just because when you cut it, it has more of a rough edge, you can wrap this Tyvek around it. And I didn't even glue this. It's really easy. All you have to do is take your piece of foam that you have cut to the right shape, take your knife, and you can just split into the foam itself. You don't want to go all the way through the foam, just a little bit, like 1/4 of an inch or so deep into the foam. Then you can take your Tyvek and something that isn't sharp. So I use these little tweezers. They're very useful for doing things. And you just push the Tyvek into the foam. And that gives a nice hold where the Tyvek goes into the foam. You don't have to worry about using glue gun, letting the glue gun heat up, having that over time degrade. Wrap it around the top, squish it into the crevice again, and you have a nice little edge that is smooth and gentle for your specimen to lean up against. And I will not take all this time to tuck that in, but then you can slide that in. And I have this foam go all the way to the edge of the box, so that if everything starts to shift sideways, this is one more protection of keeping the object centered and not smacking against the side of the box. This one was a bit more complicated. I had to use a couple different pieces of foam that I then hot glued together to make a shape that would mold underneath here and support it. So if we lift this up, slide it in, it will just rest just gently on it. You don't want it to really push into the specimen, but you want it to adequately support the specimen. So I have a couple points of pressure where the specimen is touching and laying on the foam to give it that stability. And now I can pick up to about a 45-degree angle, and the specimen is fairly secure. Obviously, you can do more, but the ideal of getting your specimen into a box is the time you have and the money you have. So you might only have the time and money to do something to just give it the support so it doesn't tip over. If you have more time and money, you might want to make a blue box if it's a very important, one-of-a-kind, never replaceable object. You can make a box for it, you can make a top for it. But this is just kind of the quick and dirty little, what you can do to get things from just a box to a bit more and protecting it a bit better. So I'm gonna go ahead and show the pot. So I have been mostly dealing with rocks and fossils because my background is more paleontology and I'm working in the Earth and Mineral Science Museum. However, we do also have more objects that are found in other types of museums. And I figured that a lot of you are probably from different types of museums and would like to see other type of things. So this is a ceramic pot. And it's kind of interesting because it's not completely round. It's more like a canteen shape with these handles. So if you think of a traditional pot ring, what you could do with a pot ring is take a piece of this round foam, put it in a circle, and then set your pot on top of it. But this guy isn't very stable and would tip over fairly easily with just something steady at the bottom. So a modified pot ring you can do for something that is a little bit more top heavy or tippy or that you're worried about because it's really tall and thin is you can use a blue board bottom and add a pot ring to the top of it. So this is a piece of blue board that I measured. To measure the pot, I didn't have a tailor's tape, so I just used our twill tape, wrapped it around the pot, and then measured the twill tape to get a nice accurate roundness. And I measure right underneath where the top of the pot is. So its highest point is right here, but I want the pot, the holder, to be right underneath that. So I measured a little bit further down and measured the diameter of the whole pot. I also measured the height from the bottom of the pot to that point, and then cut a piece of blue board that was that height and that diameter. And to bend the blue board, you just have to make some creases into it and make it nice and bendable. So my favorite way of making creases, you can use like a bone folder where you make a crease and you bend it, but I like to just take a straight edge, hold down on your blue board where you want the crease to be and pull up, and it makes a nice little curve, nice little crease that you can then use to curve your blue board. You do also want to leave extra blue board at both ends because we will be gluing this together. And you want to have that little bit of overlap to be able to get the blue stain in. So we then take the pot and place it in the blue board and sort of make sure we're at the right point with how much overlap we have. You can also measure if this is has like a friable coating on it. You can't really touch it or maneuver it that much. You can measure that again, double check that, and then just use your glue gun, glue this together. And now this is not the final step because we don't want the blue board to be up against the ceramic. That's not a soft cushioning edge. So what then we do is we can then take the round foam and you want to cut a slice on it. So this is the same diameter, a little bit longer because I give myself some play of what I had measured before of the pot diameter. And then you can just cut into it in a nice slice. You don't want to cut all the way through. Again, just enough to be able to fit it down over the edge of the glue board. So I cut about halfway through, maybe a little bit more. Then you can take your glue gun and do a nice bead. The glue gun, I usually use a glue gun on a low temperature. I like it better because one, I don't burn myself. And two, it doesn't melt the foam. So it does dry a lot quicker, cool a lot quicker. So you can't do like big parts of it as much because it's pretty cool fairly quickly. But it does prevent both destruction of your foam from it being too hot and just melting and ruining all the properties of foam you want to keep, like the air holes in it. And it keeps me from touching the glue too quickly and burning myself because I like to glue. It's just one of my bad habits. So as you can see, I'm just folding the foam around the top of the glue board and placing a line of glue, putting the foam down. And then at the end, I've got a little extra. I can just use a knife to cut that off. So the knives I tend to use are things like X-Acto knives. For the glue board, I like to use like a box cutter knife. And a couple other knives I don't have on me, but I've used in the past that have been fun are, there's this sort of foam knife that looks like this long and is like rectangular. And it's really nice to just slice through a big old chunk of epifoam. There's also hot knives you can use that I would assume would work really well on Volara because I haven't been able to get Volara to look very nice unless I'm just like really careful with a really sharp blade. So I think the hot foam knife works better on Volara. And yeah, the most important part, besides obviously not cutting yourself and that type of knife safety, cutting away from yourself, not having the sharp edges pointed away from you, is to have a sharp blade. You want your foam, your paper, you want it to cut like butter. The smoother the cut, the easier to cut, the better, the safer it is to cut. So I like to always have extra blades on hand and switch out my blades quite often. Now you can see that we did the same type of idea with a pot ring, except it's a little bit elevated. So it holds a little bit higher up on the pot. So it's just not a little teeny ring at the bottom that's really tippy. And it's a lot more sturdy. It also elevates the pot off the table a little bit so that it's not rubbing against the table or anything underneath. And that is an alternate way of making a pot ring for something that's not quite round and flat and circular at the bottom. Kind of just jumping in, sorry. Another type of thing that you might run into is, let's go with the helmet. We have like this old mining helmet, and right now it is just in a box. And just sitting in a tray, archival tray, which is a lot of collections I see, things are just put in a tray, put in a shelf, put in a cabinet, and done. This is not awful for this guy because it is sturdy. It does have a sturdy outer edge of the helmet. But you probably don't want it to sit here for forever. If it shifts and moves, it could rub the leather off the top. Different things could, it's not ideally supported. So something that you can do to make it more ideally supported would be like a tie back pillow. So I started one because they actually take a while to do. So I went ahead and started one. What it is basically is you can take a small circle that is about the diameter or circumference of your opening. And then measure the inside of your hat. This one is about 4.5 inches from the bottom of the hat to this edge of the part where it sits on your head. So I gave extra inches to a second circle that I placed, made a second circle a lot bigger, like 4 inches larger. I then lined up the circle. So I put I like folded it in half, folded them both in half, and put, I should have had a second circle to show this one, sorry. Yeah, so what you want to do is you want to have the outside of the material. So Tyvek has 2 sides to it. There's a slightly rougher side and a slightly smoother side. And you can tell which side you're on by the holes in the Tyvek. So if you look at it and it has a little bit of indentations, that's the wrong side of the Tyvek. That's a side you don't want up against your object because it's not quite as smooth as the other side. You want to, when you're doing something like sewing or gluing, as I'm going to do in this case because it's Tyvek, you want to keep the 2 outside, the parts that go against the object, the right sides together. I did start to sew this with some needle and thread. I used just a regular white thread and needle. This is great for doing things with fabric, or if you need to do something to like steady things where you can't use glue, but it is a lot more time intensive. So unless you have a sewing machine, if you're doing a whole bunch of these and you're doing it with fabric, I wouldn't suggest hand sewing much unless it's something that you really have to do. That's your really only intervention. The glue gun obviously won't last as long as the sewing. The thread is going to have a shelf life of decades and decades, maybe even more, whereas the glue gun will eventually fail. So if you want something that you're making really, really carefully, and you're making it out of really nice materials that are supposed to last super long, you might want to think about doing sewing versus Tyvek. I don't have 100% idea what the shelf life of Tyvek is, but it is a plastic and the glue gun is a plastic. So I'm expecting them to be similar. So I am using the glue gun for expediency's sake. Now what you want to do is just kind of make a short line of glue and then press your 2 edges together. And that will start gluing. And you don't want to do too much at a time because we are making these little pleats. That's why it looks kind of like a chef hat, is because I'm making these pleats in it. Because the outer circle is so much bigger, you've got all this excess fabric. And the best way to fold up to use that excess fabric up is by folding. So with a little pleat, I will do a dot of glue. Dot of glue on the outside where the fold is going to be. Fold back a little bit of the material just to form a little bit of a pleat. And since I'm using it on low temperature, I'm touching the glue fairly rapidly and it's not burning me. I would not suggest doing something quite like this on a higher temperature. So the glue, if you have a glue gun, what kinds you want to buy are either a dual temperature or a variable temperature, or even just a low temperature. Like I can use low temperature even on box making and it not be, if I work quickly enough, it will still hold the boxes together significantly well, because the higher the temperature, the longer it takes for the glue to cool off, and the glue cooling off is what creates the bond. So if you have low temperatures, the glue is going to cool off really quickly, and that bond will be created almost immediately. And that's why people like to use high temperatures, because they have time to maneuver. But it also, the higher the temperature, the worse it is for your materials and your fingers. You don't want to finish off the entire pleats. You want to leave a hole, because one, we're going to stuff it to make a pillow. And two, as I was saying earlier, this is the wrong side of the fabric. This is the inside. So to help finish the pillow, we're going to turn the pillow inside out, or actually right side out, because we had it inside out while we were making it. And now it looks more like another hat. But it's more of a pillow shape. It keeps those seams inside, so you don't have rough edges of seams poking into your object and artifact. It has this nice smooth seam, and just more like ideally something you would use to pad it would be you could use tissue paper, like an acid-free archival tissue paper. You can use a polyester batting or a cotton batting, though cotton is something that will attract certain types of museum pests, but if you have unbleached cotton, it's good for archival, for not off-gassing or bleeding. But I am a scrap hoarder. So I have this scrap of just foam pieces that I have cut off of other things. And I find that these are decent and pretty good for making padding as well. They can be a little bit lumpier than other types of things. So if you do have some batting, it might be a little bit smoother and not as lumpy as this foam scraps. But you can also, to save on polyester batting, you can put the foam scraps in, wrap some polyester batting around the edges to make it a little bit smoother as well. And this is just really good filler because it's got the air, it's got the squish, it's got the pockets. You can even use little bits of tie back, scrap tie back that you crumple up just to give it some filling and space, because you want something that has some give to it and will stand up over time. And the foam, I imagine, might not last quite as long as other things. But again, this is using a hot glue gun and using tie-back sheets. So we're thinking of overall shelf life of the entire thing. This should last for a couple of decades. It might not last for 100 years, but with the materials that I'm using, that you just got to think about kind of the archival shelf life and use appropriate shelf life archival materials at the same time. So once you have enough padding, you want it to be pretty solid. So I would still add more padding to this. I'm not going to for time's sake, but this would need more padding because it's still kind of flat and squishy. You want it to be enough to where it will fill the object just right, and leave a little bit of extra space here. So if you wanted to do something, you could place like a nice piece of Volara that is cut with the shape of the brim on the outside of the rim of the cap, and you could set everything down on this. You'd have the pillow protecting and supporting the hat, and then a nice piece of Volara underneath, and then you could set it back in your box, and it is more supportive than it was. It is also, if you have some foam underneath it, it will keep it from rubbing against the box. You can also add some foam on the sides to keep it from shifting around in the box. Or you can just take the Volara. I could say this was a Volara piece that I forgot to bring some. You could glue your actual pillow to the piece of Volara. That way when you set your hat down on the piece, you can move that whole thing around and it keeps the hat steady. This is also great for things that are squishy. So if you have an actual hat that is poofy, this is a great way of keeping it to keep its shape so it doesn't fold over, it doesn't get creases, because creases over time will degrade the fabric in that spot, and the fabric bends, it has a tendency to break down more. So this will help things keep their shape. You can also do it like dress forms. You can make it out of tie-back. You can make it out of like a linen or a muslin. Depends on what you have on hand, what you have a budget for, and what is best for the object. Every object is going to have something a little bit different that works best for it. And then if you work with culturally significant objects, you're also going to want to know what the peoples of those objects will want for their objects. So I know that some objects will have to be on like a red cloth. And normally in museums, we wouldn't use red cloths because it has a tendency to bleed, the dye components. But for certain groups of people, it might give them a spiritual significance that they need their objects on a red cloth. And then obviously we would put a red cloth with it because that's what they would like to have with their objects. Similar to what I did with the big chunk of calcite and sulfur, we have an object is sitting in a box, and I just kind of want to give it some extra support. So this might be more of like an object you guys would have in yours. We have mining equipment, which is why we have the mining helmet. I'm not sure exactly what part of the mining equipment this was, but it's really cool with these gears. It's heavy. It doesn't really sit very well by itself because the metal is a little bit bent. So what I was going to do to help hold it in place, just so it isn't sitting and putting pressure, is first I look at the side that's going to be face down on the object, or on the archival box, on the housing. We have a little bit of a foot and a foot. We've got these parts that pop out and have some nail heads to them, and also some parts here that we can build up. So similar to the calcite that I had with the epifoam and the Tyvek, I made ones where it has a little bit of a cavity in it. So this will fit underneath the foot. I don't think it was falling, but I saw something move and I panicked. Right here. So I have curved it a little bit. I just took an X-Acto knife, cut out a little bit of foam, put the Tyvek over it. The curve, you can use a pencil. I use a pencil on the foam just to kind of give it a little bit of an edge of where I want to cut. You take your knife, you cut along that line, and then I like to just bend my knife at a 45-degree angle and go underneath it again. And that cuts out just a little bit. You can then peel off. And then you have that nice shape. You can double check it against the object if you want. Then you can take a piece of Tyvek, which I thought I had. Take a piece of Tyvek, and again, like I showed before, you can just slice into the sides of the Tyvek. Just a little bit. You don't want to go very deep because that will ruin the stability of the foam. Wrap the Tyvek around, and then tuck it in again. And you get this really nice little stand for this guy. I was also found this blue box. This is one that I think we got from Gaylord. It was a pre-made one. All you have to do is fold it into the box. So with this tray, the problem with the tray is that when you pick it up, the tray bends. It's not sturdy enough for the weight of the object. So to get something more sturdy, this blue box has a lot more less bend to it. You can place your object into the blue box. With the foam padding, you can glue the foam down to the bottom of the box, or a piece of foam at the bottom of the box so it doesn't shift around. And you can just lift up and put the object back in. And it has enough sturdiness to hold the object. If a glue board isn't sturdy enough, you can add a sheet. So I could cut a second piece of glue board the size of the bottom of the box and glue it on. That will give it more sturdiness. We also have some acid-free foam core that I like to try to, you can put underneath the blue box and give it that little bit of extra sturdiness. Or there's a corrugated plastic that's really nice and tough. So now I will do an actual making of a box. This is kind of what the box will look like in the end. So I have this little teapot. It's got it doesn't have a very flat bottom, so it doesn't stand up very well. And it has these very delicate little spout and handle that you wouldn't want to bounce around. So I could do a pot ring for it, but if something bumps into it, it could easily break. So I want to do something a little bit more sturdy with some walls around it. And to keep it from tipping over, we're going to do something similar to this box here. So this is a front drop box. I do have some plans of different boxes so you can make outlines. And it's got a shelf in it. So similar to that is I made this as a completed part just so you have an idea of what I'm doing. This is a piece of chemistry equipment that we have that also has a very round bottom, wouldn't stand up. So having this part that supports the top of it to keep it from moving around, a little shelf you can slide in and out, and then the front of the box so you can get into it. So the hardest part, in my opinion, of box making is making sure you have the diameters and everything right. So I like to sketch things out. I'm a visual person. I like to draw it completely out, make sure I'm not missing everything. When you're making a box, you want to have the sides, you want to have extra tabs where you can fold underneath and glue things together, and you want to have overall dimensions. And then when you're cutting your cardboard, obviously you have a straight edge. When you're cutting it specifically, if you haven't cut cardboard before, it's very difficult to just cut straight through the first time. And it also can be really messy and hard to cut. So what I personally like to do is hold a straight edge at a couple different points so it doesn't move on me. Do just a shallow, really just like a easy, not too pressure cut. Actually use the box cutter because it cuts the boxes better. Do it with a little bit more pressure. It's going to get mostly through the corrugated cardboard. You can see it's not all the way through, but you do have a chunk of it through. Keep your straight edge in the same place is the best. Cut again. If it doesn't go all the way through on that point, you can always do one more time, but this will give you a smooth, straight cut. You won't have the raggedy edges, you won't have jaggedy bits, because you're just cutting that same line like 3 or 4 different times, even more depending on the thickness of your cardboard. But it gives you nice, smooth, straight, and then you don't like accidentally go like this and half your cardboards turn crazy, because on your first cut gives your blade an edge to sit into, and it has less likely to shift on you as you're cutting. So I have already made the template. So this is a nice box because you don't have to use one big rectangle. Some boxes you have to use a big rectangle, fold up all the sides. On the front drop box, you can have smaller pieces that you can use as scraps or what you have lying around, and use that to make the box a little bit better. I do leave an inch for my tabs that I'm gluing. If you use less than an inch for gluing tabs, it can be a lot harder to fold them and glue them. So I usually give myself at least an inch. Also, when I'm doing measurements, for example, this is supposed to be 3 inches and 3 3/4 inches long. However, when you fold the corrugated cardboard, you're gonna have about a 1/16 of an inch depending on your thickness of your cardboard, possibly more, of an area that you will be losing as you make the fold. So I always give myself about 1/8 of an inch on each seam, just to compensate for that folding. And I also like to just double check myself. So I will lay it all out. I will do all my pencil marks. You probably can't see it from here, but I've got pencil marks on this. And then I will just take my object and be like, does it fit in this spot? Oh, wait, I did some measurements wrong. It doesn't fit. This is the real quick way at this point to not get to a point where you're just like, wow, I got to start completely over. You can just make some quick adjustments at this point. This is going to be 3 of the walls of the box. So I am using this to just cut off some tabs. So I've got a tab here that's going to be a sidewall. Again, I'm going to use my straight edge as a nice little wave. You can just prop it there and bend. It's just easier if you need to do, and it seems to make some nice folds than something like a bone folder might do. I also, with bone folder, it can cut into the paper, which bothers me. So I'm just going to bend my folds. And these are my 3 walls of my box. And I have another tab here, so I'm ready to bend that out, because that's where I'm going to be gluing the box together. And these are going to be folds on the bottom that glue to the base of bottom of the tray. So also cut just from that 1 inch down. And then fold those as well. So with these, you will notice that a lot of people might cut edges, triangles at the edges. And it helps when you're doing something like this, because if you just have 2 flat square pieces of cardboard, they're going to give you this little bit of extra room there. That's going to give some instability to your base of your box. But if you use the corners, cut a nice triangle out of the bottom of that corner, of that edge. When you fold the pieces together, they meet instead of overlap. And that gives you a nice flatter edge to then glue a base onto. So you will see in some of the patterns that the edges have this cut. And they don't have to be perfect. You just take the corner off. If it doesn't fit, you can always trim it again later. I don't worry too much about, oh no, this has to be actually perfect completely, whatever. I just grab it, cut off the chunk, and roll with it and see what happens. So this is my base. I have the base in the front wall. Is this other piece of scrap? Or it wasn't scrap. It's not scrap now. Another piece, it's just a nice small thin piece of glue board. It's not just this big massive piece that I had to cut this little piece out of. You can use nice scraps. I like using scraps. It makes me feel better about it. What you have the 3 walls of the box, the bottom and the front. You make sure my bottom is not my front. So the bottom should fit directly in. Now again, you're going to come to this kind of problem where the base is a little bit too wide. So this is again why you want to test things before you glue them in. My base is just a teeny bit too much. There was somewhere with my 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch where it didn't quite line up right. So I'm just going to take my straight edge and cut off a sliver of the edge. And then try again and see if that fits. It does needs a little teeny bit more. So I'm just going to cut a little bit more. you're gonna find yourself modifying your boxes throughout your process, unless you are amazing at box making and have an absolutely complete concept of what it should look like and how it's gonna be in the end. If you're doing it right, you'll probably be modifying throughout the whole box making process, just to make sure that everything you do fits nicely. So now we have these three tops that are going to be the bottom. I just put a nice line of blue and place my cardboard on it. This is a good place where you can use clamps. Now, my favorite type of clamps are the cheap kind. So these are just binder clips. You can use them just as well as regular clamps. You can go out and buy fancy clamps, the kind that squeeze and close. You don't want to sit there and try to like screw some clamp on, but you just want to hold it together long enough for the glue to cool off. It will still be a little bit soft. It will harden more over time, but after just a couple of minutes, especially on a low temperature glue gun, it should be good to go into the next one. So again, just gonna glue and clamp. Another way of clamping is by your fingers. If you don't mind sitting here and holding something together. One of my ways I like to do it is also to press the glue line. Once you have your fold and glue line down, just press it down into the table and just hold for like 20-30 seconds. Especially in an area where the clamp doesn't really work very well. Now you've got three sides of your box and your bottom of your box and your front of your box folds. It's a little tall, but we can trim that. So to make it similar to this type of box, you would then use awl, I can't say this word, AWL, not awl. You would punch the holes into the blue board itself. You're going to make sure that they're pretty centered. You don't want it to be too close to the edge of the blue board. So a nice edge where you've got at least half an inch on each side. You can punch your holes in and you can thread in your twill tape. One cheat I like to do with the twill tape is to make basically the ends of shoelaces just out of them, because they start to unfold and they're hard to get through holes. So what I do is I take my glue gun, I do a little line at the end, I take my tweezers, because at this point the glue is still too hot to quite touch, fold the end of the twill tape over itself. At this point it isn't too hot anymore because I'm using low temperature. Roll it, use your pair of scissors, trim off the end, and basically have like a little aglet at the end of the shoelace made out of hot glue. That's great for going through holes without fraying, a lot easier to go through. Also stick it through the hole, grab the end of it, and pull with a pair of tweezers. So this will somewhat hold our pot, but I want something to hold it so it doesn't fall over. So I cut out the shelf. I basically took a piece that is the same size as the bottom of the box, cut it in half, and cut a hole in it to where it would fit around the part of the specimen I want supported. So I literally just took the specimen upside down and just kind of traced with a pencil the edges of where I wanted it to cut. And then I would align the edges of the blue board with foam. I've got either the thin ethafoam, the Volara. You can also do this with just a chunk of the ethafoam. If you have like a block of this, you can cut this to form fit. And then we need shelves to be able to hold. So that would just be lengths of blue board that is the same length as the side. You would need a bunch of them because you want it to hold both the top and the bottom. If you just hold the bottom, it will hold the shelf up, but the shelf can pop up and then that won't hold your specimen. So you need to have two pieces holding your two pieces. One like a little bracket shelf on this side and one on the other side. So that when your shelf slides in, it holds the shelf on both sides and the shelf doesn't go anywhere. So that's what I did here. I glued the two brackets in, and then I have our shelf that slides in and just fits to keep the specimen from moving around. And I think I'm running low on time, and I wanted to make sure I answered questions. So please let me know if you have questions. I would love to help.
So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. This is a very quiet group.
I will go ahead and also give my PowerPoint to Rusty to be able to send out to you guys if you're interested. It does have these concepts a little bit more in written form and logical form instead of me just throwing them as I'm making something. And had some links that I have some tutorials on YouTube that I thought were really cool that I learned a lot from. One other thing that I forgot to mention, your boxes that you make are part of the microclimate that protects your specimen. So you've got your building as the outermost protection of your specimen, then you have your room, you'll have your cabinet, and then you can use your boxes as a way to protect your specimen from humidity, from temperature changes, from particulates in the air. So this is one that I made. It's got to stand up this way in a safe, so I wanted a top on it and keep it something that would keep it from shifting. I did make slits in it with this tag, the twill tape wrapped through the slits so that the twill tape wouldn't come off. And also if people untied it, they wouldn't lose the twill tape. I made a nice little lid for it, which I then did sew with hand sewing just because I was making it out of scraps again, and I didn't use my inch, so it was a little short and was starting to buckle, so I sewed it for reinforcement. I got a nice piece of Volara that's cut out to form fit the edges. I've got edges of Volara on the edges, so if it does shift within the box, it will bump against something squishy instead of the edge of the box. I've got these little foam inserts to hold it into place. And it wasn't quite, because I did use it a little bit over an inch of the sides. I needed a little bit of extra room to brace the specimen or the objects to the top of the box. So I use this extra piece of foam. But this is just a nice way to keep the object from moving around. It has a bunch of cushioning if anything does happen and it moves in its box, then the box has a top that helps keep that microclimate, helps with the temperature changes and the humidity changes, and just protects it from dust or other particulates that are in the air. So these are just different ideas you can use to try to just be creative. Every object's going to be a little bit different. Every collection is going to be different, and nothing's going to ever be perfect, but every little bit we can do to make things better is a win in my book. And if there aren't any questions, I don't have the right time. It's my 3 minutes. All right. Anything else I can say in the last 3 minutes? Sorry, I should have been a little more organized.
Well, thank you very much, Chelsea. I had a quick question. A lot of our people, I think, would be wondering about alternate materials that they could use. What's your feeling about using bubble wrap in place of foam, and how long can you leave stuff in bubble wrap before you're in trouble?
So bubble wrap is not archival. Things like bubble wrap, things like Sharpies are not archival.
Dry cleaner bags. Dry cleaner bags are not archival. This is coming from a geology museum.
So bubble wrap will actually imprint upon your object. There have been metal vases that have been wrapped in bubble wrap, and the bubble wrap will leave little circles on the over the metal over time. So bubble wrap is not archival. I would not use it for anything more than transportation. I wouldn't even put bubble wrap against a specimen personally. If you have to use bubble wrap, always do the bubbles out. The smooth side against the object, the bubbles out, but try not to ever have your bubble wrap touch your object. The plastic it's made out of, the way it's created, it's just not going to last as long. Even though it's similar, it's not going to last as long as something like Epifoam. It's not going to have the same archival properties, and it will degrade a lot quicker. And the thing with putting things into storage for just a minute turns into years. So I have recently unwrapped things that were put into storage a minute, and it's been 15, 20 years later. The people who put it in, I have no idea who they are, and I'm unwrapping toilet paper and masking tape, and the masking tape is goopy and falling apart, and the toilet paper is just shredding, and pieces of the rocks are actually coming off onto the toilet paper from where it was rubbed a little bit. So whenever you're using something, you're going to want to use archival materials. And you're going to assume that the object is going to be touching these materials for longer than you planned, at least 3 times and maybe 5 or 10 times longer than you planned. So bubble wrap is great for if you have a box that you have boxed your object in, and then you place it into a cardboard box for shipping. You can bubble wrap around your archival box and use that as some extra padding, and then put it into a bigger cardboard box that is not archival for shipping. But do not, you don't want to place your actual specimens in anything that's not archival, because it will be there for longer than you expect, and it will not be good for the object.
If you can't afford to purchase things from Gaylord, there are grants out there, I believe, that can help you fund those materials. But if you are on a shoestring budget, unbleached muslin is always good to use. You can use that in a lot of places that you would use foam or Volara or anything like that. And that's something that you can get at, Joann Fabrics or whatever craft store you happen to have in the town that you're in.
Also, acid-free tissue paper is great, because you can crunch the tissue paper up to give you a padding. Instead of a foam, you crunch the tissue paper up and you have an area that has air trapped in it to give it that cushion. You can fold the tissue paper up and then roll it to make a nice piece more like this. If you do like a little fold to make a stack and then roll the tissue paper into a roll, you can use it in place of this type of foam. You can use it as Tyvek because it's usually pretty smooth. And you can have like a smooth edge where you wrap the tissue paper around something that's a little bit more rough, just to give it that soft edge. And it's acid free and it's archival unbleached. So it's also a very cheap, good option to use if you don't have the budget for things like Epifoam and glue board and the really it's a lot.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I know that the email addresses for Patty and Chelsea were shared earlier in the program. They have graciously offered to field any questions after this. If you have any, please email them. You can always email me at rusty.baker@pamuseums.org. If you have questions, we can try to track down answers for them. But I appreciate everybody spending time with us today. Hope you have a great rest of your day and look for more programs from us coming up in the future.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.